At my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law asked me in front of everyone to give him the keys to my farm. The first sound I remember was not the music, but the sharp clink of a glass that made the room go silent. I was standing at the back of the wedding tent, holding a paper cup of lemonade, watching my daughter dance for the first time as a bride. She looked beautiful, laughing and spinning, her white dress shining in the afternoon sun like a dream. I felt proud, tired, and quietly happy. Then my son-in-law cleared his throat, and that feeling broke. He spoke into the microphone and said there was something that needed to be settled. The music stopped, and everyone looked at him, then at me. He smiled politely and asked me to come forward. My stomach tightened as I walked closer, the gravel crunching under my shoes, my hands wet from the cold cup. He leaned toward me and quietly said it was time to hand over the farm keys. At first, I thought I had heard him wrong. Then he spoke loudly again so everyone could hear. He said this was a new beginning, and that the farm now officially belonged to him and my daughter. A wave of confusion moved through the guests. People whispered in surprise. I felt my face grow hot. "Excuse me," I said. He laughed softly, as if I had simply forgotten. He said he meant the farm, the land, the house, and the barns, and claimed we had already talked about it. We had not. Before I could reply, he added, still smiling, that I wanted my daughter to be secure, didn't I? I looked at my daughter, but she would not look at me. She stared at the ground. That was when I understood this was not a mistake. It was planned. The farm was not just property. It was our history. My parents bought that land with money they did not really have, when land was cheap and hope was costly. I grew up in a house that smelled of hay and wood smoke. I learned responsibility before algebra. I learned how to fix fences, care for sick calves, and make food last when crops were poor. When my husband died suddenly of a heart attack at 52, the farm almost died too. But I did not let that happen. I worked longer and harder than ever. I kept the farm alive with cracked hands and sleepless nights. I raised my daughter there. She learned to walk between rows of corn, to ride a horse before driving a car, and to understand what real work meant. Not work that ends at 5, but work that continues because life depends on it. The farm survived droughts, floods, and market crashes. It survived grief. It survived me. And now, at my daughter's wedding, a man who had never fixed a fence in his life was demanding the keys in public, as if they already belonged to him. Daniel, my son-in-law, was full of big plans. He came into our lives 5 years earlier. He was city-educated, well-dressed, and always talking about potential and development. He worked in real estate and specialized in improving unused land. I should have paid more attention to those words. He never called it a farm. He called it acreage. He spoke about return on investment, while I spoke about soil and seasons. We were polite and careful with each other. When he proposed to my daughter, I congratulated him. When he mentioned future plans for the land, I avoided the topic. I foolishly assumed boundaries were clear. They were not. Standing under the white tent with fairy lights above us and guests frozen in their seats, something settled inside me. It was not fear or shame. It was clarity. I slowly set my lemonade down and looked straight at Daniel. I asked if he wanted the keys. He nodded, pleased, and said it was time to make things official. I reached into my purse as every eye watched. I pulled out the farm keys and held them up so the sunlight shone on them. For a moment, I saw victory on his face. Then I closed my hand around the keys and smiled. I said no. The word was clear and final. The whispers grew louder. Daniel laughed too quickly and said this was not the place for jokes. I agreed and told him I was not joking. My daughter finally looked up and softly said, "Mom." I turned to her and gently asked if she knew about this. She hesitated, and that pause told me everything. Daniel became tense and said they had discussed it privately. I told him no, he had decided it privately. He stepped closer and said quietly, "Margaret, let's not do this here." I looked at him and replied, "You already did." It was the truth, spoken out loud. I turned to the guests and calmly said that I did not know my life's work was part of the wedding ceremony. But since it had been mentioned, I wanted to be clear. I raised the keys and said the farm was not a bargaining tool, not a dowry, and not a reward for marrying my daughter. Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Daniel's smile vanished. He said sharply that I had promised to support them. I told him I promised to love my daughter, not to give up my independence. His voice grew cold as he said that without the land, their financial plans would fail. I interrupted and said those were his plans, not mine. The silence that followed was heavy. Then I turned to my daughter again and told her she deserved security, but not at the cost of my dignity. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time that day, she nodded. The reception went on, but everything felt different. Daniel stayed away from me. Guests came quietly to offer support. Some hugged me, others whispered words of encouragement. That night, my daughter came to my house alone and sat at the kitchen table where she used to do her homework. She said she did not know how to stop him. I made us tea and told her that you stop things by speaking up, even when it feels uncomfortable. She stayed the night. 3 months later, she moved back home. The marriage did not last a year. The farm is still standing. The fields are still alive. I updated my will, not to punish anyone, but to protect what matters. One day, my daughter will inherit the land, with one condition. She must never forget that ownership means responsibility. Love does not demand surrender, and respect is not something you hand over like keys. Never confuse entitlement with love, and never give up your dignity just to keep the peace. What you build with sacrifice deserves respect, and anyone who truly loves you will honor that.